Will the New Orleans Saints pay wide receiver Chris Olave like a top 5 receiver? That is the question we're going to tackle here on this edition of the Sleeper Saints podcast. My name is TJ Jones, and thank you so much for stumbling across the Sleeper Saints podcast, where we talk black and gold, the New Orleans Saints. And on this edition, we're going to be talking about Saints wide receiver Chris Olave. Will he be paid like a top 5 receiver? Does he deserve to be paid like a top 5 receiver? But thank you so much. I ask that you hit the like and subscribe button to help the Sleeper Saints podcast to grow. I would really appreciate that. But let's talk a little bit about Chris Olave. Now, Chris Olave is coming off his best season as a pro. He had 100 receptions, 1,100 yards, and 9 touchdowns, and a second-team All-Pro. So everything seems to be trending upward for Chris Olave, especially since he was coming off a season where he had a devastating concussion that cost him the majority of the season. He only had like 400 yards, and he had a lot to prove. At the beginning of the last offseason, questions were asked to Chris Olave about what does he feel he needs to bring to the table in order for him to be able to get a new contract, or has he been negotiating a new contract? And Chris Olave, to his credit, kept it 100. He said that he has a lot to prove. And when you have a lot to prove, you can't go out here trying to negotiate and talking about you need this and that when it comes to compensation. You have to go out there and prove it. But Chris Olave was able to go out and put together a really good season. And it just seemed like everything started to come together, especially towards the end of the season. It seems as if the chemistry between Chris Olave and Tyler Shuck was at an all-time high. And they're looking to build off that momentum they had last season and bring it into 2026. But before we get into the regular season, Chris Olave wants to get paid. And it seems like both sides, Chris Olave's representation and the Saints organization, it seemed like they're pretty amicable. It seems like they're going to get a deal done. But the question is, what will this contract look like? And will it get done before training camp? Now, Chris Olave has been a good sport throughout this entire offseason. He has been around the facility. He probably showed up in some of the best shape he's been in since he's been in the NFL. He put on muscle. He even got a haircut. I mean, he's indicating that this is a new Chris Olave that we're talking about here. And he has been the leader that the Saints need him to be in the wide receiver room. Hasn't been complaining about a contract, just been out there putting in the work. You can respect that. But as we get closer and closer to training camp, now we're talking about guys going out there and really being physical. And you don't want to jeopardize your contract going out there and possibly getting injured. So guys seem to have a cause to pause when it comes to training camp when they're dealing with contract negotiations. So I don't want to see Chris Olave. I'm pretty sure you don't want to see Chris Olave sitting out, especially when you know it, that he is the leader in the Saints locker room. He is a guy that the Saints are going to be counting on to be able to make plays this season. Now, everybody's excited about the number 8 overall pick, Jordan Tyson. I mean, you should be. He's a talented guy, and all signs indicate as long as he stays healthy, he is going to be an elite wide receiver. But Chris Olave is still, as of right now, the best receiver on the Saints team. So you want to see him around. But this isn't your typical guy proved himself. Now it's time for him to get a big contract type situation. I mentioned in 2024, Chris Olave suffered a devastating concussion. And I can tell you, I was at that game. It was scary to watch Chris Olave be knocked out on the field. And I'm pretty sure it was a very scary experience for him and his family. But Chris Olave has had a history of concussions throughout his career that dates back to his time at Ohio State. You have to believe that the Saints organization are taking that into consideration when they're trying to structure a contract for Chris Olave. And it's fair. I mean, football is a business at the end of the day. We hear that all the time, and sometimes we don't want to come to grips with that. But that is just the truth. And teams are going to look out for the team, and players have to look out for the players. So I'm pretty sure it's not that the New Orleans Saints don't believe in Chris Olave. I think they want to protect themselves. So what does a contract for Chris Olave look like? And, I looked at some of the top guys that are getting paid in the National Football League at the wide receiver position. And we're going to take a look here, and we have to see where Chris Olave lands. Now, we see Jackson Smith-Njigba, who just recently got a contract. He makes $42.1 annually. Then you have Jamar Chase at $40.2 annually. Drake London, who recently got a contract, he's at $35.2. Justin Jefferson sitting at $35 million. And CeeDee Lamb at $34 million. Those are the top wide receivers that are getting paid and what they're getting paid annually every single year. Now, I mentioned Jackson Smith-Njigba. I mean, he's coming off an Offensive Player of the Year campaign. He deserves to be the highest paid wide receiver in the league, no question. Jamar Chase probably is the best wide receiver in the game, depends on who you ask. Justin Jefferson at 35, nobody's going to argue with that. I think when you look at Chris Olave, you have to compare him to Drake London. If you look at their stats, virtually identical. I want to say Drake London maybe played in a few more games than Chris Olave. Their stats are virtually the same. So I think you have to compare the annual salary of Drake London, and you have to put that on the table when it comes to Chris Olave getting paid. Chris Olave getting paid around 35.3 or 35.2, something that is similar to Drake London's contract, I think would be suffice. The question is, where are we when it comes to guaranteed money, and what type of incentives are the Saints going to put in a contract? For example, if Chris Olave ends up getting injured again, or I'm knocking on wood when I say this, but if he was to get a concussion, I mean, are the Saints going to put something in the contract that protects them from that? You don't want to think about that, because these players put their bodies on the line. They put their lives on the line to go out there and perform. So you have to think about that. But that just shows you how football is when it comes to the negotiations. Sometimes it can be a little bit cruel at times. But I think the Saints have to look at Drake London's contract and maybe size Chris Olave up against that contract, and I think it'll be fine. But I want to see this contract get done sooner rather than later. As a football player, you want to make sure that you have financial security. You don't want to be half stepping out at practice or something like that, or the fact that you're probably, trying to take it easy and then an injury does occur, and because you're trying to protect yourself, because you are the investment, right? And until you get some level of financial security long term, you want to make sure that your body is upright. So hopefully the New Orleans Saints can get this contract done with Chris Olave before they start training camp on June 29th, because Chris Olave being out there is important to a lot of these players. I mentioned Jordan Tyson earlier. This is a guy that is going to be a good player, in my opinion, but Chris Olave could mentor this guy and have him opposite of him, and these guys can really make some noise. And Tyler Shuck going into his second season, you want to make sure that he is as comfortable as possible. You did a lot of things to try to build some talent around him in order for him to understand that he doesn't have to do it by himself as of right now. So you want Chris Olave to be out there to be that locker room leader in the wide receiver room for these guys, and you want to make sure that this guy has a peace of mind, knowing that he is going to be paid, and he can be able to take care of his family and get his generational wealth, which he deserves. But at the end of the day, these contract negotiations can get a little bit hostile. I'm glad to hear that this isn't one of those cases. It seems like Chris Olave is optimistic about what the New Orleans Saints are going to do when it comes to him long term. I believe that they're going to pay him to a point where I think both sides are going to be happy. Only time will tell when that would happen. Hopefully it'll happen by training camp. But let's go ahead and move on. Let's get to the Sleeper Saints mailbag. These are questions from the Who Dat Nation. And if you have questions about the black and gold, feel free to send them to me, stateofthesaints at gmail.com. That's stateofthesaints at gmail.com. Now, the first question comes from Marcus, and his question is, what do you think about Saints wide receiver Jalen Polk, who has been impressing coaches as of late? Do you think he will be a good wide receiver for the Saints? Well, thank you, Marcus, for the question. Do I feel that Jalen Polk, can he be a good wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints? And my answer is yes. I like Jalen Polk. I think that Jalen Polk is a talented wide receiver. He was a second-round pick a couple of years ago coming out of the University of Washington. He made plays. He was supposed to end up being that number one guy for the New England Patriots. It didn't work out. He had an injury, and the Saints ended up making a trade for him. They just had to give up a 6th-round pick in order for him to come to New Orleans. And I think that is one of the issues that Who Dat Nation has with Jalen Polk. And that maybe it's because of what the New England Patriots gave up, what the Saints got back. They look at that and like, I don't know if this guy is good enough. But, sometimes like guys where they are may not fit them. Maybe the scheme doesn't fit. Maybe the culture doesn't fit. And they just need to go somewhere else. I just have an issue when we see players move on from another team and we just automatically just assume just because the team moves on from them that player isn't good enough. Maybe that player just wasn't good enough in that system. But I look at Jalen Polk. He's about 6'2", 6'3", about 200 plus pounds. And, he's a guy that's a disciplined route runner. He's more of a possession guy. And he has chemistry with Tyler Shuck. It seems like they have a good relationship. They hang out outside of practice. They get the work in. And I just think that Jalen Polk is going to be underrated for the Saints. I don't think too many people are talking about him because of the whole trade. But this is a 2nd-round pick that has the talent and, has some injuries along the way. But I think as long as he can stay healthy, he can be important to this offense. And if somebody was to go down, I think that he can step up in that spot and be able to make some plays. It's just all about, when your number is called, answering the call. And, I think Jalen Polk will be able to do that. I think that he will be a solid wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints. He won't be a number one guy, but I think that he can be a member of the supporting cast. I think about wide receivers in the past like Lance Moore, right? Lance Moore wasn't a number one receiver for the Saints, but anytime Drew Brees needed Lance Moore, he was right there making plays. I think Jalen Polk can be the New Orleans Saints version of Lance Moore if he stays healthy. This one comes from Erica. Erica says, do you think Tyler Shuck is going to go through a sophomore slump? What happens if he goes through a sophomore slump? Now, this is a good question because this is something I don't think Saints fans are really thinking about. Everybody's excited about Tyler Shuck and what he can bring to the table and what he can be for the New Orleans Saints. Everybody's looking at him as the future, justifiably so. What he did last season, I mean, you have to be impressed if you're a Saints fan, and you have to be optimistic about the future. But a sophomore slump is realistic. We have seen players come into the league, take it by storm, and then the second year, they don't look as good as they did in the first year. Like we think about Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels, I mean, he was flirting with not only offensive rookie of the year, but league MVP. He led the Commanders all the way to the NFC Championship game. Next season, I mean, he had some injuries, but even without the injuries, he wasn't the same player. So you can't just automatically assume that a rookie finds success early is going to look that way in year 2. But I look at Tyler Shuck. I think about all the experience he had at the collegiate level. I think about how he is able to process things now. All of the reports that you read, it seems like everything is coming together. And I just think the maturity level that people criticize him about and question him coming into the NFL, I think is going to pay dividends for him this season. And if he does have a slump, that's the reason why you shouldn't just build your entire team around Tyler Shuck offensively. That's the reason why you need a running game. That's the reason why you need players that can be able to make plays in space, make people miss. So you're not just solely relying on a quarterback to throw for 300, 350 yards and 4 touchdowns every single week. Having a competent defense that can get stops if the offense isn't what it needs to be on Sundays. So Tyler Shuck having a sophomore slump, it could possibly happen. But I think that Tyler Shuck is doing all the things that he needs to do to make sure that he doesn't have that slump. And the Saints, from what I'm seeing, they're putting this team together where they don't have to solely rely on Tyler Shuck. They bring in Travis Etienne, who is a very competent running back, 3,000-yard seasons. We don't know the status of Alvin Kamara, but if Alvin Kamara is a part of the team in the running game, I think it just makes the Saints running game stronger. I think the sophomore slump could possibly happen if you just put all of your eggs in a Tyler Shuck basket, but if they don't, I think that he'll be fine in year 2. And the last question we'll read, it comes from Drew. Drew says, what Saints running back could step up if the Saints decide to trade Alvin Kamara away? Now, we just talked about Alvin Kamara and him being a part of the team with Travis Etienne in the running game. But I think if the New Orleans Saints were to trade Alvin Kamara, I think Devin Neal would probably be the guy that I would look at to pick up the slack. And no, he is not going to be Alvin Kamara. But I'm just looking at the running back pecking order. Devin Neal is a talented running back. He was a 6th-round pick. In any other draft, he probably would have fell to the 3rd or the 4th round. But when you have guys like Omarion Hampton and Quinshon Judkins coming out, it was hard for a guy like Devin Neal to be a 3rd or 4th round pick, especially when we know what the NFL does when it comes to the running back position is pretty devalued. So Devin Neal is a guy that I feel like can be a featured back with the New Orleans Saints, complement a Travis Etienne if Alvin Kamara was to be traded. I think that he really showed something towards the end of the season, but like guys like Kendre Miller that's on the team, like you got to be on the field. I mean, Devin Neal got hurt very early in camp. He didn't play in any preseason games. Well, if he did, I think he may have played in the 3rd one for a short period of time. But it shows you the respect level that the New Orleans Saints had for him. He was in the game week 1 of the regular season last year versus the Arizona Cardinals. That shows you what the New Orleans Saints think of the talent level and the skill set of a Devin Neal. So I think that Devin Neal would be in that spot. You probably would have a guy like Todd Chandler would probably be in there, because he can play special teams and maybe short yardage situations. But I think that Kendre Miller will more than likely be the odd man out. You look at the fact that he's not a Kellen Moore guy. You look at the fact that he has been injured every single year he's been in the NFL. Talented guy. And if he was to stay healthy, I think that there's something there. But when coaches select players, they have a tendency of trying to keep those players around to try to justify the decision. So I would say Devin Neal would be the running back that would be behind Travis Etienne if the New Orleans Saints would go in a different direction. But thank you so much for sending in your questions. And once again, you can always send your question in stateofthesaints@gmail.com. And thank you so much for checking out this edition of the Sleeper Saints podcast. Once again, my name is TJ Jones. You can follow me on X at TJAYJones8. And please hit the subscribe button and the like button to help the Sleeper Saints podcast to grow. Shouts out to everybody that has subscribed already and has tuned in to all of the episodes that we have put out. Looking forward to building this channel with you and talking about the New Orleans Saints. Till next time, all I got to say is, who dat?